I lost over $500,000. It was a get-rich-quick dream in a booming mining town that turned into a 6-year nightmare. One day, we had the funding for our project. The next, the bank pulled the plug, just like that. This is the story of that $500,000 disaster and the painful lessons I paid for so that you don't have to. It all started with that simple, seductive idea: financial freedom. My wife Kylie and I weren't professional real estate moguls. We were just regular people with decent jobs, a family home, and that nagging feeling that there had to be something more. We'd read the books, we'd watched the seminars, and we saw property as our ticket out of the 9-to-5. Our goal wasn't just to top up our income, it was to replace it, to build a legacy, to finally own our own time. The opportunity, when it popped up, felt like something out of a movie. It was the peak of the resources boom, and certain remote towns were just exploding. These weren't just towns, they were like little economic miracles. The news was full of stories about skyrocketing property prices and rental yields that seemed totally fake. A single room in a shared house could rent for what a whole city apartment would. The demand for housing was insane, driven by an army of workers flocking to the mines. We zeroed in on one of these towns. Let's just call it Red Earth. From the outside, Red Earth was electric. The streets were packed with brand new trucks. The local pubs were overflowing every night. Help wanted signs hung in every single window. It felt like a modern-day gold rush, and we were convinced we'd timed it perfectly. The mood in town was pure euphoria. Every conversation was about expansion, the next big project, and how this time, the boom was different. This time, it was built to last. We found what we thought was the perfect deal. A large, older house on a block of land you could subdivide right in the center of town. The plan was simple, at least on paper. We'd buy the property, get the council to approve a knockdown rebuild, and put up a duplex, 2 modern 3-bedroom townhouses. The numbers were just intoxicating. Based on the current market, each townhouse would sell for a price that, combined, wouldn't just pay back our investment, but would net us a profit of over $500,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. We did what we thought was our due diligence. We talked to local real estate agents who were, of course, incredibly optimistic. They showed us comparable sales that backed up our numbers. We spoke to builders, we even looked at the council plans. Everything seemed to be lining up. The get-rich-quick bug had bitten us hard. We weren't just investing, we were chasing a dream that felt so close we could taste it. And the bank seemed to agree. We presented our plan, our numbers, our so-called research. We had good credit, some equity in our family home to use as security, and about $100,000 in cash saved up. They gave us pre-approval for the development loan. That piece of paper felt like a golden ticket. It was the validation we craved. The big, institutional nod that told us our dream wasn't just a fantasy. It was a solid, bankable plan. We were so focused on the prize that we were completely blind to the risk. We saw the booming market not as a potential bubble, but as proof of our own genius. Mining towns are famous for being volatile, their economies tied to the wild swings of global commodity prices. But in the heat of the moment, surrounded by all that buzz, it just felt like some boring academic problem. We were on the ground, and on the ground, everything was pointing up. We were about to pour every dollar we had and all the equity we'd built over a decade into a single high-stakes bet in one of the riskiest markets you can find. We weren't diversifying, we were concentrating all our hopes into one roll of the dice. But at the time, it didn't feel like a gamble, it felt like a sure thing. With the pre-approval in hand, we jumped in with both feet, buying the property and settling smoothly. The first few months were a whirlwind of activity and excitement. We hired an architect to draw up the plans for our 2 beautiful townhouses. We brought on a consultant to navigate the maze of council approvals. This was the knockdown stage, the real point of no return. And every step cost money. The drawings, the engineering reports, the council application fees, it all started adding up, chewing through our $100,000 cash buffer. But we just saw it as the cost of doing business. Every invoice we paid was just another step closer to that $500,000 payday. We watched our bank account shrink, but we'd just look at the property prices in Red Earth, which were still climbing, and tell ourselves it was all fine. On paper, our project was getting more profitable by the week. Then the first red flag appeared. It was small, almost nothing. The council approval took longer than we expected. Our consultant had figured 3 months. It stretched to 6. Just bureaucracy, he'd tell us. They're swamped. And it made sense. The town was booming. Of course the council was busy. But those 3 extra months were 3 more months of holding costs, more interest payments on the loan with 0 progress on site. Our buffer was disappearing way faster than we'd planned. The second red flag was a whisper in the financial news, a slight cooling in commodity prices. One of the major global buyers of our country's resources was showing signs of a slowdown. In the city, it was a minor headline. In Red Earth, it was a topic of hushed conversations at the pub. But the general vibe was optimistic denial. It's just a blip, people would say. A temporary correction. The builders were still building. We chose to believe them. We had to. We were in too deep. While waiting for that final council stamp, we started trying to finalize the construction loan with the bank. Our contact, who'd been so rah-rah at the start, was suddenly a lot harder to get a hold of. Emails took days to get a reply. Phone calls went to voicemail. When we finally got him on the line, his whole tone had changed. He was cautious. He wanted more documents, more projections. He wanted a market risk reassessment. This was the third and biggest red flag. The bank was getting nervous. They were seeing the same headlines we were, but they weren't just shrugging them off. They saw a material change in the risk. They weren't looking at the red earth of 6 months ago. They were looking at the red earth of tomorrow. And they did not like what they saw. We scrambled. We sent them everything they asked for. We got updated, even more optimistic sales appraisals from the local agents. We reworked our budget to show a bigger contingency fund. We did everything we could to prove that the project was still the golden goose we'd promised. We weren't just selling the dream to ourselves anymore. We were desperately trying to sell it to the very people who held the key. After weeks of anxious waiting, the final council approval came through. It was this huge but brief moment of relief. We had the green light. All we needed was the cash from the bank. I called our bank contact feeling triumphant to give him the news. His response was completely flat. "I'll submit this to the credit risk team," he said. "They're doing a portfolio-wide review of all development in resource-dependent regions." A portfolio-wide review. Those words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about our little project anymore. We were a tiny cog in a giant machine that was grinding to a halt. The fate of our dream, our savings, and our family home was now in the hands of some faceless committee in a boardroom hundreds of miles away. A committee looking at spreadsheets and risk charts. The get-rich-quick dream was turning into a brutal lesson in financial reality. The red flags weren't just flags anymore. They were sirens, and we were standing at ground zero. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the weather was beautiful, which felt like a sick joke. I was at my desk at my 9 to 5, trying to focus on a spreadsheet that seemed completely pointless compared to the decision hanging over our lives. My phone buzzed. It was the bank. But it wasn't our usual guy. It was his manager. That was the first bad sign. "I'm calling about your development application for the property in Red Earth," he started. His voice was cold. All business. No small talk. "Yes," I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "We just got the council approval." "I'm aware," he said. "Unfortunately, the bank's position has changed. Given the significant downturn in the resources sector and the revised negative outlook for property values in that region, the credit committee has decided to withdraw all financing for speculative developments in that area, effective immediately." The words just hung there, so clinical and final, I couldn't process it. "What do you mean, withdraw financing? We have pre-approval. We've spent nearly $100,000 based on that." "Pre-approval is conditional," he stated, like he was reading from a script. "It's subject to a final unconditional approval. Due to the change in market conditions, that cannot be granted. The risk is now unacceptable. The funding is pulled." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started to shake. "But we're ready to knock the house down. It's empty. We have the permits. What are we supposed to do?" "That's not something the bank can advise on," he said. "We will not be proceeding. I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. It was that sterile, corporate sorry that just means this conversation is over. And then he delivered the final, soul-crushing blow. "On top of that, due to the revaluation of the security property in Red Earth, your loan-to-value ratio is now outside of policy. We will require a principal reduction of $50,000 within 30 days. It was an actual nightmare. Not only were they not giving us the money to build, they were demanding more money for the land we already owned. Land that, in their eyes, was suddenly worth a fraction of what we'd paid for it just months earlier. I hung up the phone. I just sat there, staring at my computer, the numbers blurring. The office chatter faded into a dull roar. It felt like I'd been punched in the stomach and all the air had been sucked out of the room, out of my life. The $500,000 dream had just vanished in a 2-minute phone call, and a black hole had opened up in its place. We were completely stranded. We had a vacant property that was costing us thousands in interest every month, with a set of approved plans that were now useless. We had burned through our entire $100,000 in cash. And now the bank wanted another $50,000 that we just did not have. That night, the conversation with Kylie was the hardest we've ever had. There were tears, there was blame, and there was this terrifying shared panic. The dream we had so excitedly built together had been completely obliterated. We didn't just lose some potential profit. We had bet the equity from our family home, the place our kids slept at night, on a market that had just collapsed. The disaster was total. We were trapped. The get-rich-quick dream had become a $500,000 catastrophe, and we were about to lose everything. This was, without a doubt, the absolute lowest point of my financial life. A moment of complete, gut-wrenching failure. And if you've ever felt that kind of pressure or made a mistake that cost you big, I want you to know you're not alone. Let me know in the comments what the biggest lesson you've learned in investing is. We can all learn from each other. And if you're finding this story valuable, please hit that subscribe button. The second half of this is about the 6-year climb out of this hole, and the lessons that I guarantee will help you avoid the same mistakes I made. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was just pure survival mode. The bank's demand for $50,000 was a ticking time bomb. We didn't have it. Our savings were gone. We had to find that money or they'd default us on the loan, which would then trigger defaults on all our other loans, including our home mortgage. The only asset we had left with any real equity was our family home. The home we'd poured our love into for years. The home where we were raising our kids. The decision to sell it was agonizing. It felt like a public announcement of our failure. It's one thing to lose money on an investment. It's another to have your kids walk past a for sale sign on their own front lawn because of a gamble you took. But we had no choice. We sold our home. After paying off the mortgage and the agent's commission, we had just enough to pay the bank their $50,000 and cover some of the bleeding on the now toxic land in Red Earth. We went from homeowners to renters overnight. The equity we had spent a decade building was just gone. That was the start of a 6-year trip through financial hell. The loss wasn't just the $100,000 cash we'd torched. The real loss was the land itself. We'd bought at the absolute peak. It was now worth less than half of what we owed the bank. All told, when we finally managed to sell that cursed block of dirt years later for pennies on the dollar, our total realized loss was just over $500,000. Those 6 years were a blur of shame, stress, and grindingly hard work. Here's what it really looked like. Years 1 through 2, the bottom of the hole. This was the period of sharp, acute pain. We moved into a small rental that felt like a shoebox. Every letter from the bank sent a jolt of anxiety through me. We told almost no one the full story. It's hard to explain the shame that comes with a financial failure this big. It feels like a judgment on your character, your intelligence. Our relationship was tested to its absolute limits. Money is a massive source of stress, and we were living in a financial pressure cooker. We fought. We second-guessed every decision we'd ever made. But we made a pact. We get through this together. We had to. Professionally, I just buried myself in work. I took every extra shift, every side project I could find. Kylie went from working part-time to full-time. We lived on a bare-bones budget. No holidays, no new clothes, no eating out. Every single dollar was accounted for. Our lives became about 2 things: working and paying down the debt on that piece of dirt in Red Earth. Years 3 through 4, the slow, painful grind. By year 3, the panic had faded into this dull, chronic ache. The market in Red Earth was dead. There were no buyers for our land at any price. So we just kept paying the interest, month after month. It was like pouring water into a bucket with a giant hole in it. This was also when I became obsessed with learning. I was determined to understand exactly what I did wrong. I read every book I could find on risk management, market cycles, and economic fundamentals. I became a student of failure. I realized my mistake wasn't just bad luck. It was a predictable outcome of terrible decisions, all fueled by greed. I had ignored every single rule of sound investing, and that's when our mindset started to shift. We couldn't change the past, but we could damn well change our future. We stopped seeing ourselves as victims and started focusing on the rebuild. The goal wasn't just survival anymore. It was to one day invest again, but this time to do it right. Years 5 to 6, seeing the light. Around year 5, a flicker of hope. A new, smaller project started up near Red Earth, and a few bargain hunters started sniffing around. We finally got an offer on our land. It was insultingly low. It would mean locking in a massive loss, but it would stop the bleeding. It would end the monthly interest payments that were strangling us. We sold the land. The day the sale settled wasn't a celebration. It was a day of quiet, somber relief. The nightmare was finally over. We took the huge financial hit, but we were free. The final year was all about resetting. Our credit was damaged, but not destroyed. We had been meticulously paying every single bill on time for years. We had saved a small deposit through sheer force of will. We started talking to mortgage brokers again, but the conversations were different this time. We weren't talking about get-rich-quick deals. We were talking about buying a modest, stable, cash-flowing property in a large, diversified city. 6 years after that phone call, we bought our next property. A simple, boring, 3-bedroom house in a normal suburb. It wasn't a spectacular deal. It didn't promise a $500,000 payday, but it was based on solid fundamentals. And when that purchase went through, it felt like a bigger victory than the Red Earth dream ever could have. We had survived, we had recovered, and we had paid, in full, for an education worth $500,000. They say experience is the best teacher, but it's also the most expensive one. I paid over $500,000 for this education, so I'm giving you the main takeaways for free. These aren't theories from a book. These are the hard-won lessons forged in the fire of a 6-year financial nightmare. Lesson 1. Get rich quick is a trap. Period. The single biggest mistake was falling for the get-rich-quick fantasy. I was seduced by the idea of a fast, massive payday. That mindset makes you prioritize potential profit over managing risk. It makes you see a crazy, speculative market as an opportunity, not a giant warning sign. Real wealth is built slowly. It's built on discipline, patience, and compounding. It's boring, and boring is beautiful. If an investment promises fast, spectacular returns, it is carrying equally spectacular hidden risks. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Every single time. Lesson 2. Your greatest risk is concentrated risk. I bet everything on one strategy, in one town, in one industry. I wasn't diversified. I was the exact opposite. I put all my eggs in one basket, then handed that basket to a unicyclist on a tightrope. When that single pillar crumbled, my entire financial house came down. Real resilience comes from spreading your risk across different properties, different cities, and even different types of assets. You need to be able to survive the failure of one investment without it causing your total ruin. Lesson 3. Become a master of real due diligence. My due diligence was a joke. I listened to people who had a vested interest in selling me something. I didn't do a deep, independent analysis of the town's economy. I didn't study the history of mining town property cycles, which are classic boom and bust stories. Proper due diligence is unemotional and skeptical. It means stress testing. Don't just calculate your best case scenario, calculate your worst case. What happens if interest rates double? What if the value drops 30%? What if you can't find a tenant for 6 months? If you can't survive the worst case, you can't afford the investment. Understanding the market. Is the economy diverse, or does it all depend on one industry? Population growth, infrastructure, and job diversity are what create stable, long-term growth. Conservative financing. I was way too leveraged. I used too much of the bank's money, which left me with no cushion. A lower loan-to-value ratio gives you a crucial buffer against market drops. Lesson 4. A cash buffer isn't a suggestion, it's your lifeline. We had $100,000 in cash, which sounds like a lot, but for a development, it vanished in months. When the bank demanded an extra $50,000, the tank was empty. That's what forced us to sell our home. A financial buffer is not part of your project budget. It is a separate, sacred fund of at least 3 to 6 months of all your expenses, personal and investment, that you do not touch. This buffer is what gives you holding power. It's the ability to wait out a bad market without being forced to sell at the worst possible time. Lesson 5. Understand the power of tax strategy the right way. During my years of obsessive research, I learned that a smart tax strategy can be a powerful tool for building resilience. Now, this is not tax advice, and the rules are different everywhere, but the principle is universal. It's about understanding how depreciation works in your country. In most places, when you buy an investment property, you can claim a yearly tax deduction for the wear and tear on the building. This is called depreciation or capital works deduction. It's a paper expense, meaning you don't actually spend the cash that year, but it still reduces your taxable income, which can save you a lot of money in taxes. Where a lot of investors miss out is by not properly identifying all the different assets within the property. Things like carpets, appliances, and air conditioners often have a much shorter lifespan than the building itself, and the tax office lets you deduct their value much more quickly. This is sometimes called accelerating depreciation. By working with a specialist, like a quantity surveyor in Australia, you can get a detailed report that breaks down all these costs. This allows you to maximize your deductions in the early years of owning a property. Those tax savings mean more cash in your pocket. Cash you can use to pay down debt, build your buffer, or reinvest. It wouldn't have stopped the bank from pulling our funding, but knowing how to optimize our tax position could have provided the extra cash flow to help us weather the storm, or at least rebuild much faster. It's a key strategy I use now on every single property I buy. So, after 6 years, a lost home, and a $500,000 hole in our lives, where are we now? We did recover. We rebuilt our savings, our credit, and our confidence. We are homeowners again. We are investors again. But we are fundamentally different people. The experience, as brutal as it was, stripped away the greed and replaced it with a bit of wisdom. It taught us that wealth isn't a destination you sprint to. It's a structure you build, brick by boring brick, on a foundation of solid risk management. If you're watching this and you're in the middle of your own financial battle, I want you to hear this. You can recover. It might take longer than you want, and it will be harder than you can imagine, but failure is not final unless you let it be. The shame you feel will fade. The lessons you learn will last a lifetime. My $500,000 loss was the most expensive education I ever got, but it was also the most valuable. It taught me that the goal isn't to avoid all risks. That's impossible. The goal is to understand the risks you're taking, to respect them, and to build a financial life that's strong enough to withstand the storm when it inevitably comes. Thank you for letting me share this. It's not an easy story to tell, but if it saves even one person from making the same mistakes, then it's worth it. Build smart, build patiently, and always, always protect your downside. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more honest conversations about the realities of real estate investing. And check out this other video on your screen where I break down exactly how I analyze a rental property today to avoid blowing myself up. Thanks for watching.